He only had 15 minutes to save his career, but he stopped for a stranger with 3 heavy suitcases and trembling hands. "Where are you watching from?" Because what happened next turned a missed flight into the beginning of something far greater than fame. The terminal buzzed with the familiar chaos of thousands of lives intersecting for fleeting moments. Keanu Reeves moved through the crowd like a man running from his own shadow, his worn leather backpack sliding off one shoulder as he checked his phone for the 100th time. 15 minutes. That's all the time standing between him and the flight to Chicago. Between him and what might be his last real shot at redemption. His manager's voice still echoed in his ears from their morning call, sharp and unforgiving. "This is it. Keanu. The press is circling like vultures. One more failure and you're done. Not just career-wise, but reputation-wise. They're waiting to watch you crash and burn." The independent film waiting in Chicago wasn't just another audition. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. A chance to prove that beneath the weight of Hollywood's expectations and a string of commercial disappointments, the actor who once moved audiences still existed. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he navigated through clusters of travelers, each absorbed in their own urgent journeys. The departure board glowed with cruel precision, counting down the minutes until gate B12 would close its doors. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from the physical exertion, but from the suffocating weight of everything riding on this moment. This wasn't just about money or fame anymore. This was about finding himself again, about remembering why he fell in love with storytelling in the first place. Then he saw her. An elderly woman stood near the security checkpoint, her silver hair catching the harsh fluorescent light as she struggled with 3 oversized suitcases that seemed determined to escape her grasp. Her floral dress was wrinkled from travel, and her sensible shoes suggested someone more accustomed to quiet gardens than airport terminals. Margaret looked around helplessly as streams of passengers flowed past her, like water around a stone. Each person too absorbed in their own urgency to notice her quiet desperation. Keanu's steps slowed, then stopped entirely. His mother's voice whispered across the years, gentle but unwavering. "When you have the power to help someone, Keanu, you help them. No matter what it costs you." She had lived those words until her final breath, teaching him that kindness wasn't a luxury for the convenient moments, but a responsibility that defined who you truly were. He glanced at his phone again. 12 minutes now. His thumb hovered over his manager's number, knowing he should call, should explain, should prioritize the career that hung by such a delicate thread. But Margaret's hands were shaking as she tried to lift the heaviest suitcase, and the sight of her struggling alone in a sea of indifferent strangers made his chest tighten with something deeper than professional anxiety. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you with those?" His voice was softer than it had been in years, stripped of the practiced charm he wore for cameras and interviews. Margaret looked up with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of decades, eyes that seemed to see straight through to the person he was beneath the celebrity veneer. "Oh, you're very kind, dear. I'm afraid I've overestimated my abilities with these bags." Her voice carried the gentle cadence of someone who had learned to find grace in life's smaller moments. As Keanu lifted her suitcases, feeling their surprising weight, Margaret began to share fragments of her story. She was traveling to see her grandson graduate from college, carrying gifts and memories that had accumulated over months of careful preparation. "I need to get to Terminal D, Gate 47, she said, consulting a crumpled boarding pass with nervous fingers. Keanu's stomach dropped. Terminal D was on the opposite side of the airport, a 15-minute journey on a good day. With the security lines in the distance, helping her would mean sacrificing everything he'd worked toward in recent months. He stood at a crossroads that millions of people face but few recognize for what it truly is. The logical choice screamed at him from every practical corner of his mind: his career, his reputation, his financial stability, his chance at artistic resurrection, all of it balanced against helping one elderly woman navigate an airport. The mathematics of self-interest were crystal clear, but as Margaret smiled at him with genuine gratitude, as her weathered hand briefly touched his arm in a gesture of trust, Keanu felt something shift inside him. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a moment of blinding clarity. It was quieter than that, deeper than that. It was the recognition that some choices define us not by what we gain, but by what we're willing to sacrifice for others. "Let's get you to your gate," he said, shouldering two of her bags and extending his arm for support. The walk through the airport became a journey through Margaret's life. She spoke about her late husband, a teacher who had believed in the transformative power of education. She talked about her grandson, brilliant and kind, who reminded her that hope lived on in younger generations. She shared stories about her small garden, where she grew tomatoes that she gave to neighbors, believing that small acts of sharing created invisible threads that bound communities together. With each step, Keanu felt his phone buzzing with increasing urgency. His manager's texts grew more frantic, more desperate. But Margaret's gentle presence seemed to create a bubble of calm around them, a space where the commercial pressures and professional anxieties that had consumed his life for months felt suddenly insignificant. When they reached Gate 47, Margaret's flight was already boarding. She turned to him with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude. "You have a beautiful soul, young man. Don't let the world take that away from you." She pressed a small piece of paper into his hand before disappearing down the jetway, leaving him standing alone in a terminal that suddenly felt vast and empty. Keanu looked at his phone. His flight to Chicago had departed 8 minutes ago. He sank onto a nearby bench, the weight of what he'd just done settling over him like a heavy blanket. The paper Margaret had given him contained a simple message written in careful script. "Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back." But those words felt hollow against the magnitude of what he'd sacrificed. The independent film would move forward without him. The director would find another actor, one who understood the importance of professional commitment. His manager would probably drop him by morning. For 20 minutes, he sat in that uncomfortable airport chair, watching planes taxi outside the massive windows and wondering if he'd just made the most expensive mistake of his life. The rational part of his mind cataloged all the ways this single act of kindness might unravel everything he'd worked to rebuild. But beneath the anxiety and regret, something else stirred, a strange sense of peace, as if he'd finally remembered who he was supposed to be. Then he heard familiar footsteps approaching, the same measured pace he'd matched while helping Margaret navigate the terminal. He looked up to see her walking toward him, but this was a different Margaret than the one he'd helped earlier. Gone was the floral dress and nervous energy. Instead, she wore an impeccably tailored navy suit, her silver hair styled with understated elegance, and her entire bearing radiated the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice now carrying an authority that made him stand instinctively. "I believe we have some business to discuss." The transformation was so complete that for a moment he wondered if he was dreaming. This wasn't the grandmother struggling with luggage. This was Margaret Hale, CEO of Hale Airlines, one of the most successful women in American aviation, whose personal story of building an empire from a single cargo plane had become business school legend. "I make this journey twice a year," she explained as she gestured for him to follow her toward a part of the terminal he'd never seen before. "I travel as an ordinary passenger, observing how our staff treats people, how our systems work when no one knows I'm watching. It's the only way to truly understand the experience we're providing." They walked through a private entrance that led to the airline's executive terminal, a space that existed in a different universe from the chaotic public areas. Here, everything was whisper-quiet efficiency and understated luxury. Margaret continued her explanation as they moved through corridors lined with artwork and windows that offered panoramic views of the runway. "What I didn't expect today was to become the variable in someone else's test. You had every reason to walk past me, every justification to prioritize your own urgent needs, but you didn't. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped her, even when it cost you something precious. They emerged onto a private tarmac where a sleek corporate jet waited, its engines humming with quiet power. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and possibility, and Keanu realized he was no longer the same person who had rushed through the terminal an hour earlier. "I'm flying to Chicago for a board meeting," Margaret said, pausing at the aircraft's steps. "I believe you had business there as well. Consider this my way of ensuring that kindness doesn't go unrewarded in a world that too often punishes it." As the plane lifted off, carrying them both toward a city that now held different meanings for each of them, Keanu understood that some moments change everything, not through dramatic revelation, but through the quiet recognition that our truest choices are made when no one is watching, when the only witness is our own conscience, and when the measure of our character is revealed not in what we achieve, but in what we're willing to sacrifice for the simple human obligation to care for one another. The private jet's cabin hummed with a quietness that felt almost sacred, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind at the terminal. Through the oval windows, the landscape below transformed from urban sprawl to patchwork farmland, each field telling its own story of seasons and harvests, of dreams planted and hopes cultivated. Keanu settled into the leather seat across from Margaret, still processing the surreal turn his day had taken, still grappling with the woman who had revealed herself to be so much more than the grandmother struggling with luggage. Margaret gazed out at the clouds that drifted past like memories made visible, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest as if she were reading invisible maps of her own journey. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades, each word carefully chosen, each pause pregnant with meaning. "You know, I wasn't always Margaret Hale, CEO of an airline empire. Once upon a time, I was Maggie from the south side of Chicago, a girl whose family counted pennies to buy milk, whose shoes had holes that let in every puddle's worth of rain." She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes, Keanu saw not the polished executive who commanded boardrooms, but the young woman who had fought her way through a world that had little use for poor girls with big dreams. "I was 19, working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water, when I found myself stranded at a bus station in Detroit with exactly 37 cents in my pocket and a job interview the next morning that could change everything. A stranger, a businessman in a wrinkled suit who looked almost as tired as I felt, bought me a bus ticket without asking for anything in return. He didn't even tell me his name. The memory seemed to transform her, softening the edges that years of corporate battles had sharpened. That $60 bus ticket became the foundation of everything I built afterward. Not just financially, though that job did lead to others, but emotionally. It taught me that sometimes the universe sends us messengers disguised as ordinary people, reminding us that we're not alone in this struggle, that kindness exists even when we've forgotten how to recognize it. Margaret leaned forward, her gaze intense but gentle. "What about you, Keanu? What dreams did you have before Hollywood taught you to measure success in box office numbers and critical reviews? What did you love about acting before it became a business? Before it became something you had to survive rather than something that fed your soul?" The question hit him like a physical force, stirring memories he had buried beneath years of professional disappointments and commercial pressures. He found himself speaking words he hadn't said aloud in years, maybe hadn't even acknowledged to himself. "I wanted to tell stories that mattered. I wanted to be part of something that made people feel less alone, that reminded them of their own humanity. But somewhere along the way, I lost that thread." Hollywood has a way of turning dreams into products, turning passion into performance metrics. His voice grew quieter, more vulnerable. "The last few years, I've felt like I'm acting even when the cameras aren't rolling, playing the part of someone who knows where he's going, when really I'm just trying not to disappoint everyone who's invested in my success. There's this emptiness that follows me around, this sense that I'm missing something essential about why I wanted to do this work in the first place." Margaret nodded with the understanding of someone who had navigated her own labyrinth of lost purposes and rediscovered meanings. That emptiness you're describing, I know it well. It's what happens when we build our lives around other people's definitions of success instead of our own sense of purpose. She paused, studying his face with the attention of someone reading a crucial document. I have a proposition for you. Something that might fill that empty space with something more substantial than applause or paychecks. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents and photographs, spreading them across the small table between them like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Hail Airlines isn't just about moving people from one city to another. We're in the business of connection, of making the world smaller and more accessible. But there are places where that connection breaks down, where young people with brilliant minds and capable hands never get the chance to learn the skills that could transform their communities. The photographs showed young faces from around the world, eager eyes and hands ready to learn, workshops filled with equipment that could teach precision and craftsmanship. I'm planning to establish aircraft maintenance training centers in developing countries, places like Nairobi, São Paulo, Ho Chi Minh City. These centers would train local technicians not just to maintain aircraft, but to become experts in their fields, to eventually train others, to create sustainable career paths in their own communities. Keanu studied the images, feeling something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in months. These weren't headshots or promotional materials. These were real people, real opportunities, real impact measured in changed lives rather than changed bank balances. It sounds incredible, but I'm not sure what this has to do with me. I don't know anything about aircraft maintenance or international development. Sakpuna, Margaret smiled. The kind of smile that suggested she saw potential where others saw obstacles. Leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about caring enough to learn everything, about surrounding yourself with experts, and then having the vision to see how all the pieces fit together. What I need is someone who understands the power of storytelling, who can communicate this vision to communities, to potential students, to local governments, someone who has learned how to connect with people, how to make them believe in possibilities they hadn't imagined. His phone buzzed with increasing urgency, messages from his manager that grew more frantic with each notification. Finally, he glanced at the screen to find news that should have filled him with relief. The audition had been rescheduled for the following morning. The opportunity he thought he had sacrificed was still within reach, still possible, still waiting for him to claim it. But as he looked up from the phone to meet Margaret's expectant gaze, he realized that the landscape of his possibilities had shifted completely. The role that had seemed so crucial that morning now felt like just another job, another chance to play someone else's version of success. Margaret was offering him something different entirely, a chance to step into a story larger than himself, messier than a script, more uncertain than a guaranteed paycheck, but infinitely more meaningful. As their plane descended toward Chicago, the city's lights spread out beneath them like stars fallen to earth, each point of light representing lives and dreams and connections waiting to be made. The skyline reached toward the darkening sky with the confidence of a place that had rebuilt itself from ashes, that understood the power of reinvention, that knew how to turn setbacks into comebacks. They found themselves later that evening in a restaurant perched on the 57th floor of one of those gleaming towers. The entire city spread out below them like a map of possibilities. Margaret unfolded an actual map across their table, her fingers tracing routes across continents, connecting dots between countries and cultures and communities that seemed impossibly far apart. Aviation shrinks the world, she said, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who had never lost her sense of wonder at what was possible. But it doesn't do that equally for everyone. These training centers would change that equation, would give young people in developing countries access to careers that could support not just their families, but their entire communities. A skilled aircraft technician can earn enough to send siblings to school, to support parents, to invest in local businesses. Keanu found himself leaning into the map, imagining the lives that could be transformed. the ripple effects that could spread outward from each trained technician. The pay would be 3 times what the film is offering, Margaret continued, her tone matter-of-fact rather than persuasive. But more importantly, this is a chance to be part of something that will outlast any movie. Something that will create opportunities for generations. The weight of the decision pressed against his chest like a physical force. Everything rational argued for taking the film role, for rebuilding his career on familiar ground, for choosing the path that led back to the life he had known. But rationality felt insufficient in the face of Margaret's vision, inadequate to address the emptiness that had been growing inside him for years. When she handed him a simple business card with nothing but her name and a phone number, her words were gentle but firm. "Call me after your audition tomorrow. I believe you'll make the right choice, whatever that choice turns out to be." The audition the next morning went better than he had dared to hope. The director praised his performance. The producers offered him the role with a salary that would solve his immediate financial concerns and restore his professional standing. Everything he had worked toward for months was suddenly within his grasp, concrete and achievable and safe. But as he sat in the production office, contracts spread before him like a roadmap back to familiar territory. He couldn't stop thinking about Margaret's map, about the young faces in those photographs, about the bus ticket that had changed one woman's life and led to opportunities for thousands of others. He remembered being 17 and stranded downtown with no money for bus fare home. Remembered the stranger who had handed him exact change without being asked. Remembered the gratitude that had stayed with him for decades. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, dialing Margaret's number instead of his manager's, choosing uncertainty over security, meaning over money, a story he couldn't yet imagine over a script that had already been written. When her voice came through the phone, warm and unsurprised, he realized he had already made his choice the moment he had helped her with her luggage, had already stepped onto a path that would lead him far from everything he had known but closer to everything he had forgotten he wanted to become. 18 months had woven themselves into a tapestry of transformation that Keanu could never have imagined that desperate afternoon in the terminal. The African sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the Hale Aviation Training Center in Nairobi, painting everything in shades of gold that seemed to make the red earth glow with possibility. From his office balcony, he watched a group of Kenyan technicians work with the quiet confidence of people who had found their calling, their hands moving with precision over aircraft components that would soon carry passengers safely across continents. The journey to this moment had been carved from 6 months of intensive training in Seattle, where veteran mechanics had patiently taught him the intricate language of aircraft engines, the delicate balance of systems that made flight possible. Those were nights when he had fallen asleep over technical manuals, mornings when he had doubted his ability to absorb decades' worth of expertise in a matter of months. But Margaret had been right about leadership requiring not omniscience, but commitment, not perfection, but the willingness to learn alongside those you hope to guide. The early days in Kenya had tested every assumption he had about his own adaptability. His first attempts at speaking Swahili had been disasters of pronunciation and grammar that had sent his students into fits of barely suppressed laughter. But their patience with his linguistic fumbling had taught him something profound about the reciprocal nature of teaching, about how learning flows in multiple directions when hearts are open and pride takes a back seat to genuine connection. He remembered the morning when everything had clicked, when Aisha, a 22-year-old woman whose determination had carried her through secondary school despite her family's skepticism about education for girls, had successfully completed her first independent engine diagnostic. Her face had radiated pure joy as she announced her findings, her technical vocabulary mixing English and Swahili in a way that perfectly captured the bridging of worlds that the center represented. "Mr. Keanu," she had said after class that day, her voice trembling with emotion. "My grandmother worked in factories her whole life, never earned enough to send her children to school. My mother cleaned houses, dreamed of something better, but never saw a path. I am the first person in my family to have a profession, a real skill that companies need." She had paused, searching for words adequate to her gratitude. "You didn't just teach me about engines," You taught me that I belong in places I never thought I could go. That conversation had crystallized everything Margaret had tried to explain about the ripple effects of opportunity, about how one person's advancement could reshape entire family trees, could plant seeds of possibility that would bloom across generations. Aisha now supervised a team of 5 technicians and was saving money to sponsor her younger sister's engineering education, creating her own chain of transformation that stretched far beyond anything Keanu could have accomplished alone. Today marked the official inauguration of the center, and the courtyard filled with a mixture of government officials, airline executives, and local dignitaries whose presence testified to the program's growing reputation. Kenya's Minister of Transportation, a dignified woman whose own rise from rural poverty to political leadership embodied the country's evolving possibilities, spoke about aviation as both literal and metaphorical bridge building, about skills training as national investment in human potential. Margaret arrived as she always did, with understated elegance that commanded attention without demanding it. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had learned to carry authority lightly, stopping to speak with each graduate, asking detailed questions about their work, remembering personal details from previous visits that revealed the depth of her investment in their success. When the moment came to unveil the commemorative plaque, the bronze rectangle caught the afternoon light like a mirror, reflecting dreams made manifest. The inscription read simply, "Hail Aviation Training Center, Nairobi, where kindness creates opportunity." Beneath those words, a date marked not just the center's opening, but the day when Margaret's vision had begun its transformation from possibility to reality. Margaret approached Keanu with a small wrapped package, her eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as hoped. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a gift that felt both substantial and delicate. Inside was a sterling silver luggage tag shaped like a vintage suitcase, its surface engraved with coordinates that marked not just Nairobi's location, but the center's exact address. "This luggage is much lighter to carry, isn't it?" she said, her words carrying multiple layers of meaning. They both remembered that first day, the weight of her suitcases, the burden of his career anxieties, the heaviness of choices that had seemed impossible to make. Now they stood surrounded by evidence that the hardest choices often led to the most meaningful destinations. The minister's announcement that Ethiopian Airways had signed a comprehensive partnership agreement with the center, guaranteeing employment for graduates and creating a pathway for regional expansion, marked not just institutional success, but validation of everything they had worked to prove. This wasn't charity or feel-good symbolism. This was sustainable impact, measurable change, professional opportunity that would endure long after the ceremonies ended. Later that evening, as official duties gave way to personal reflection, Keanu found himself back at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, the place where Margaret's story had begun with a stranger's kindness decades earlier. The terminal buzzed with its familiar energy of departures and arrivals, of lives intersecting briefly before continuing toward distant destinations. Near the international departures area, he witnessed a scene that stopped him in his tracks. A young airport employee was struggling to assist an elderly passenger whose multiple bags seemed determined to escape his grasp. Other travelers streamed past, absorbed in their own urgent schedules, recreating the same tableau of human indifference that had defined the moment when Keanu's own transformation began. Without conscious thought, he stepped forward to help, lifting the heavier bags while the employee handled the paperwork complications. The elderly man spoke mostly in Arabic, but gratitude translated across language barriers, communicated through handshakes and smiles that needed no interpretation. It was a small moment, lasting perhaps 5 minutes, but it felt like coming full circle, like honoring the chain of kindness that had brought him to this point. A fellow passenger had captured the interaction on her phone, and within hours the video had found its way to social media platforms where context and background transformed a simple act of helpfulness into something more significant. The caption read, "Actor turned aviation educator Keanu Reeves still finds time to help strangers at airports. Some things never change." The post went viral not because of celebrity involvement, but because it reminded people of their own capacity for everyday kindness, their own power to make someone's journey a little easier. Margaret called him from Chicago, her voice warm with amusement and pride. "I see you're still in the habit of helping with luggage," she said. "I have a proposition for you. São Paulo is ready for its training center. Are you ready for your next adventure?" Standing on the observation deck that night, watching planes taxi across runways that connected Kenya to the wider world, Keanu felt the profound satisfaction of purpose fulfilled and simultaneously expanded. Each aircraft that passed before him represented not just machinery, but human potential, carried mechanics trained in this building, touched by hands that had learned precision and pride through programs born from a moment of kindness between strangers. The stars above Nairobi seemed brighter than any he had seen during his Hollywood years. Not because the sky was clearer, but because the work beneath them had weight, had meaning, had the power to create opportunities that would ripple across continents and generations. He thought about Aisha, about the dozens of other technicians whose skills would ensure safe flights for thousands of passengers, about the families whose economic situations had improved because someone had decided that kindness deserved practical expression. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new possibilities to transform individual lives into collective progress. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of what was possible when good intentions met strategic action, Keanu understood that he had found something more valuable than career resurrection or financial security. He had found his place in a story larger than himself, a narrative where success was measured not in applause, but in opportunity created, not in personal achievement, but in legacy built one life at a time. Keanu Reeves' story serves as a profound reminder that kindness, no matter how small, possesses the extraordinary power to unlock doors we never imagined existed. A simple act of helping a stranger at the airport transformed him from someone searching for purpose into a leader who would change the lives of thousands of people. This transformation didn't happen by accident. It began with one conscious choice, one moment of deciding to extend compassion instead of walking past someone in need. The ripple effects of that single gesture continue to inspire people worldwide, proving that our smallest actions often carry the greatest weight in shaping destinies. I believe with every fiber of my being that each of us holds within ourselves the incredible opportunity to create meaningful difference in this world. The only requirement is choosing kindness over rushing, choosing to pause and truly see the person standing before us rather than hurrying past them in our endless pursuit of the next destination. So when your defining moment arrives, what choice will you make? Share your thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for motivation for success to receive more inspiring stories that could change your life.